All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood coming back to you live. Hope you all are well. Just want to kind of break down today's session. Should be about a half an hour, hopefully. Keep this short. Don't want to take up too much time. It's my goal with these things. But hopefully do something useful for you. So I put out a poll on Facebook this last week, and of the responses, it appeared that the majority of you wanted me to go live every week. So there was something useful, I guess, about me talking with you every week, and I'm happy to do that. It's just a matter of making sure that you keep your end of the bargain and either like, comment, and share and whatnot, or if you have the means, if you can support me on Patreon, that would be phenomenal. Just $1 a month is fine. Anything to keep this process going and make it easier for me to consume books, materials, research, etc. Because the problem is it's very difficult to afford all these things if I don't have regular income coming in outside of that. So my thing is I started a Patreon so that you all could support me, so that it'll be easier, so that you can get exactly what you need in terms of, the right answers, the most definitive answers about things, so that you can actually get the truth as opposed to someone's opinion, because there are plenty of people out there with opinions, plenty of good sounding people, I guess you could say, with opinions, and their opinions don't mean anything whatsoever. So they just don't. I mean, unless your opinion is backed by facts, it's not really worth even saying, in my opinion. However, I want everyone to have a voice. Everyone should have a voice. In fact, it's terribly important that we have a voice. The problem is, although we all need to have a voice so that we can contribute to the discussion, some voices are louder and some voices are more respected. We've chosen to not respect the voices that are based upon sound reasoning, and the voices that are speaking about concepts that have sound reasoning and sound facts. So one of the things I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about kind of a sound reasoning way of looking at relationships. This is part of my book, but all this to say is, if you can support me, if you want me to go weekly live on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, then I really need your support. If you really could help me, that would be great. Because I'm trying to bring you facts. I'm trying to bring you opinions and ideas and concepts that are science-driven. And these are the ones that are theoretically going to move us forward as a culture, as a group, as a species. Culture progresses through challenge and through learning. So I'm trying to challenge you guys by introducing either new concepts or old concepts in a way that makes them useful and valuable and approachable. So that's just my little pitch for Patreon, if you would be so kind. Or at the very least, just like and share. So there's that. It's a little housekeeping. So as a result of you guys asking me to go live weekly, then I thought about, well, what could I do that would be useful? That would be kind of more intensive. And what I came up with is a way of kind of talking about parts of my book that is coming out in October 2nd. It should be available before that, but that's the official release date. Thank you to Mascot Books, again, for that. But I want to talk about different concepts that you're going to find in my book and give you kind of a more in-depth, more thoughtful way of looking at them than what's briefly presented in the pages of the book. So today I want to talk about the concept of adaptive group identification. So in my book, I write about the concept of tribalism. Now, tribalism is not a new thing. It's not something unique to me. I'm not like the first person to talk about it. Plenty of people have been talking about it for the last 10 or 15 years. People like Sam Harris and Brett Weinstein and Ben Shapiro and all sorts of Michael Shermer, very, very brilliant people have already been discussing this concept, and Robert Wright, a person I greatly respect as well. All these people have been talking about tribalism at debates and at conferences, so it's not new. I'm not doing anything unique in that way. However, my spin on tribalism, my particular perspective on it is a little different. And then my solution is a little different as well. So what I've decided to offer to you guys is the concept that you're going to find in my book that I'm going to describe in detail there, called adaptive group identification. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think I've heard anyone really talk about this idea. I've looked through the research literature when I was writing the book, in the evolutionary psych literature, the anthropology literature. I have yet, in the sociology literature, I have yet to see this phrase show up. I've heard this phrase one other time, and it's not even identical. I heard Eric Weinstein say this on the Dave Rubin podcast. I think he said something like, what is the adaptive way of looking at our group identity? And I don't think he actually has written anything on it. And if he has, I greatly apologize for not either having read it or kind of thought about it more. But we have a problem. One of our problems right now is that we have this weird set of us versus them fights going on. And I did a whole talk that you can find on YouTube and on Patreon about tribalism. And in this talk, I described kind of the different dynamics of us versus them that happens all the time. So the easy example in the United States is something like, I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican and I don't like you because you like Donald Trump and I like Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or something. And, now we have to be some kind of mortal enemies and we need to like fight it out in a Street Fighter game or something like that. It's become this preposterous that, because of politics and because of, these sensationalized figures like Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and Dick Cheney and George Bush and all of these gross individuals, we have decided to kind of hate each other. And I explained in the tribalism video earlier last year that we have this natural instinct to want to be like our group because our group is what keeps us alive. So if we highly self-identify as part of a group, then that's our tribe. And our tribe is what keeps us alive. We need our tribe for sure. So what I would say, I guess, what I would encourage you to think about is the idea that, hey, thank you, Derek. Yes, absolutely. Families are a big part of the tribalism concept, and there's a lot of fighting within families about politics and stuff like that. So I appreciate you commenting. That's absolutely true. I miss you, by the way. Yes, 100% families are a big part of the whole tribalism thing. And with regard to politics, I think that's probably where we've seen the most kind of family conflict in the last probably 5 years. Is there's been this ever-growing us versus them in terms of I'm a conservative, you're a liberal or a Democrat or whatever. And we just fight endlessly and needlessly because we think that our tribe, our political tribe, is more important to our well-being than our literal tribe, like our family. Because theoretically speaking, the family is the most stable unit of mental health. So if we have a healthy family, it's so much easier to succeed in life. Whereas if we don't have a stable family, then we're more likely to fail and we're more likely to kind of struggle on a regular basis with mental health issues, with work issues, with intimate relationships, all sorts of things. So if we have a healthy family, we're more likely to succeed in a number of ways. And I'm happy to talk about the research that supports that concept. You can also listen to Jordan Peterson talk about it too. He's got the truth there, I think. However, politics is just really screwing us. It's really screwing us. I think as a concept, it's really messing us up. And this video is not intended to be just a long worry session. It's really intended to be this kind of exploration of this concept that I believe I've come up with. I think this is something that I uniquely have created. And if I have not, if I somehow read this somewhere and I missed it and I'm stealing from someone, please tell me right away. Please tell me I'm engaging in some kind of plagiarism because I don't want to be that guy and I want to be intellectually honest to a fault. But this is the concept I came up with and I put in my new book, The Fear Problem, coming out October 2nd. Adaptive group identification. We have become over-identified with so many groups. So just think real quickly about your life, whether you're watching right now or you are watching later on, sometime down the road. Think about all the groups with which you can identify. Think about all the different, let's call it tribes, you could identify with. It's probably a lot. There's probably a lot of group variables that you could identify with. So I'll just use myself since that's the easiest example. So my name is Patrick Lockwood, and that name has a mixture of German, Scottish, Irish, and English descent. So there's 4 variables right there. There are 4 nationalities from which my lineage is part of, okay? Then I'm tall. I'm over 6 foot, or I'm at 6 foot, so that means I'm above average in height, so I'm tall. So there's a second group. I have blonde hair and blue eyes, so I kind of fit that Aryan stereotype. I'm a male, so that's my sex, or gender, whatever you want to say, typically sex because that's the medical concept. I have a certain IQ. I have a certain occupational status, so I have a doctorate degree. Whether that's good or not doesn't even matter to me. It's just, it's a fact. I work in a certain type of industry, right? I have a certain job. I make a certain amount of money each year. I have a romantic relationship, so I'm not single. I have friends, so I'm not lonely. I have all these different groups with which I can identify. There's at least 10 right there. There's 10 different tribes with which I could identify right there. And then you can add things like religious orientation, philosophical orientation, political orientation. You can add concepts like economic orientation. Are you a capitalist, a communist, socialist, whatever? You can add concepts like, what else would be easy groups to identify with? Race, right? So race, white, whatever the fuck that means. So you can add that in there too. So there's just probably dozens of ways to slice and dice a person. Now the question becomes, which of these kind of labels, which of these identities that you have, which is most important? And why is it most important? And this is what I was writing about in my book, and that I hope you all read and you can give me lots of feedback about, because I still have not been able to answer this question after listening to brilliant people speak, podcasts and stuff like that, lectures, after reading numerous research papers in sociology and psychology and evolutionary anthropology. I cannot tell which label is supposed to be the most important. Is the fact that I'm a male more important than the fact that I'm a psychologist? Is the fact that, you know, I'm tall more important than the fact that I'm kind of young, right? So young, age is a label, right? So, you know, these are all labels. So the question is, which label is important? And I haven't been able to figure that out. I haven't been able to come up with some kind of concrete evidence-based answer as to which labels are the most important. And I think depending upon your worldview and your culture, you're going to answer that question differently. And it seems nowadays in the United States, at least, and in other kind of Western countries in Europe, people are fighting over their labels. You're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I'm a libertarian, you're a socialist. All of this crap we're fighting over. And it's total nonsense. My perspective is that it's total nonsense. And it's worsening, it's exacerbating our fear problem, which is why I titled the book, The Fear Problem. So this tribalism thing is getting in the way, and it's making us stick to labels in a way that doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe once upon a time, there was a necessity for knowing which religion you were part of, right? So in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, if you knew that you were part of X, Y, and Z religion, you knew that you were a Christian or not, or if you knew that you were part of the group of people that supported whatever gods in your home, that was probably useful. Is it useful now? Is it useful that I know that Ben Shapiro is some version of kind of, you know, Jewish and believes in that kind of way of being, was raised that way? Is it useful that Jordan Peterson is some version of Christian, whatever that means? And I would still love for him to make some kind of definitive statement about the existence of God. He hasn't, but it'd be great if he would. Is it useful to know that people like Sam Harris and Michael Shermer are atheists? Does that really actually do anything for us? It's great to know where we stand as individuals, but to what degree does that label mean anything? So, personally speaking, my spiritual orientation in the world plays almost no role in how I see the world. I don't constantly think about my belief or lack of belief in God all day. It means nothing for me, right? You know, and pragmatism, the goal, the idea is which is going to give you the best outcome the most efficiently. Decrease suffering, I guess you could say, most efficiently. And I think I did a post about this yesterday. There was a Nietzsche quote, and the reality that Nietzsche tries to preach is that everything is relative, which kind of, as Jordan Peterson says, leads you into this pathway to despair, which is probably not what we want. So I say we can tone down the relativism by going with this concept and not being in despair, and not feeling lost, not knowing which one to choose or which one to focus on, by using the concept I've created called adaptive group identification. So here's how the concept works. I'm going to describe how the concept works, and then I'm going to describe what the next kind of couple of parts of my lecture series are going to focus on. So adaptive group identification I came up with when I was writing the book 2 years ago. And it goes something like this. The extent to which your identity as whatever both allows for less suffering in the Buddhist sense and greater flexibility and movement throughout the world and causes no consequences to other people, the better. Right? So those are kind of the basics. It's kind of a sense of, does my identifying this way create more conflict and more suffering for me or not? Does my identifying this way keep me alive in some substantial way or not? And does my identifying this way, you know, create suffering for other people or not? Right? So self-other, suffering more or less, more effective or less effective. Those are the categories by which I would judge an identity, a self-identity, as adaptive. So let's take something that's inherently just very problematic and everyone fights over, and I'm probably going to get some kind of flack for because I'm using the words, but let's just take race. Let's take race. And I'm going to do a whole talk on race and racism next time because I figure it's a good place to start. It's a nice incendiary topic. So let's say that we want to figure out how adaptive it is to identify as our race. So this is not me trying to be psychotic. I'm not trying to say, well, let's just ignore the fact that I'm white, right? I'm just going to pretend that I'm not white. That's not what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying don't look in the mirror and don't acknowledge what you look like. What I'm saying is, to what degree does acknowledging the color of your skin actually do anything for you? And to what degree does it actually make your life better or worse? Right? That's really what the concept of adaptive group identification is about. And that's why I wrote about it. And that's why I think it's going to be a useful one that hopefully should shake things up a little bit in a couple of different disciplines at least. How much does it actually matter, right? So there's all sorts of literature in the psychology and sociology world about racism. Tons of literature, and a lot of it is hearsay, and then a lot of it is kind of fear-based reactionary kind of let's figure out how bad I feel stuff, which is fine. And then a lot of it is kind of this nice mix of, you know, how deep and how detailed is the problem in terms of racism, and then for what groups, right? So we can scientifically say that racism is X prevalent, right? We can say there were this many hate crimes in the year 2017. We can say this many incidents of hate speech on the internet existed, right? And we can kind of objectively measure those things. And that's useful. And that tells us something, not the whole truth, but just something about how racist the world is and how much the color of your skin might play a part in how you see things and how you're treated. And it can give you some idea of like probabilities, the likelihood of being treated a certain way. That's one way of looking at it. Then there are other ways of looking at the concept of racism. So you can talk about, you know, how useful is it to identify as, you know, black for some reason. So my favorite example of this in the there is no racism, systemic racism category is a guy named Jesse Lee Peterson. He's a funny man, and he's a sharp guy, and he's here in LA. If you're ever interested in the other perspective about the idea that systemic racism doesn't exist, he's probably the, if not the most interesting, the funniest one to listen to about it, because he's a black guy, he's a black preacher, and he is terribly witty, and he has all sorts of good snappy comebacks. Now, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what he says, or some of what he says. However, he has got the right idea when it comes to admitting the real impact of racism on his life, right? He's done the intellectually honest thing and said, this is how my life has turned out as a result of what we would call systemic racism. And the extent to which he's identified himself as black, I think, is a very kind of, it's a subjective choice, but he's been able to do it in such a way that's adaptive for him, right? And if you just watch a couple of his videos, you'll get the picture real quickly, where he's culturally identified, right? He's religiously identified, he's politically identified, and he's definitely racially identified. However, the balance, the levels of identifying as one or the other, one's more important than the other, they shift and they change based upon the circumstance. And that's why I like the concept of adaptive group identification. If I were sitting here in every talk with you talking about the fact that, well, because I'm white, this must be true, you would look at me funny, right? You would think I was insane if all I did was sit here and talk about the fact that because my ancestors said it's true or whatever, and other white people say it's true, then it must be true, right? You would think I was absolutely 100% insane, and you would never watch me again. So that would be not adaptive. That would be maladaptive group identification. I'm so interested in my ethnicity and the color of my skin that, you know, it pervades everything that I do, which is so, I think, maladaptive. I think a lot of people in the kind of Black Lives Matter community have gone too far. And you can hate me for that, or you can say I'm a bigot or something for that, but it's just kind of the truth. I think they are not in the category. They're too far on one side of the spectrum in terms of group identification. The color of their skin has become so important that their intellectual honesty about so many other facets of who they are as people is lost. And that's a problem, because we're not simple creatures. Humans are still animals, and we still are kind of primal and base, like I said last week. However, we are not simple in the sense that our identity is just one thing, or even the most important thing, right? My academic identity, my philosophical identity, my religious identity, my male, masculine identity, whatever. None of these things should be the most important thing about me. That's my belief. And it seems like the people who are so set to be focused on just one aspect of their identity. I'm straight, I'm gay, I'm black, I'm white, whatever. If that's the focus of who you are, your life is not only going to be more one-dimensional, but you're going to experience more conflict. And you're going to experience a lot of interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict specifically, because we're not designed to just think of ourselves in one way. Society and culture is too complex to just say, because I'm X, that's who I am. Because I'm a plumber, that's all that I am. Because I'm a professor, that's all that I am. Because I'm white, that's all that I am. Because I'm Hispanic, that's all that I am. That's not true. That's not adaptive, because it doesn't allow us to be the full range, intellectually, emotionally, of person that we can be. It's self-limiting, right? There's so much more creativity, and everyone wants to be special, right? Everyone talks about that thanks to Sesame Street, I guess. Everyone's special. So we've gone from this mindset of everyone's special to, well, you're all the same if you look a certain way, or you're all the same if you sound a certain way. So everyone's special has kind of disappeared, it seems like. All this is to say, there's a more adaptive way of looking at concepts like race, religion, socioeconomic status, height and weight, sexual attractiveness, or physical attractiveness, if you want to call it that, intellect, occupation, educational status, cultural and historical background. There's a better way of looking at it. And I think the only good way that I can do this with you guys in a straightforward and really intellectually honest way is to actually take one concept at a time and then apply my concept of adaptive group identification to what the literature says about each of these concepts. So here's what I'm proposing, and here's what I'm going to do. If you don't want me to do it, you should tell me now, because it's my plan to do it. If you think I'm some kind of bigot as of right now, you should let me know, because, well, A, I'm not going to care, but B, I want to be able to respond and explain how the facts are more important than your biases. Racism is real. Sexism is real. Heterosexism is real. You know, prejudice against religions are real. All these concepts are real. But all of these concepts nowadays are being taken to the nth degree, to the extreme. And because they're being taken to the extreme by people in the news, people in academia, people on college campuses, people on social media, we are now having unnecessary fights. So what I want to do for the next 3 weeks, so I have there's three more parts to this, is I'm going to tackle the three biggest, in my mind, sources of conflict in terms of self-identity. So I'm going to tackle race. That's going to be super fun, and I'm probably going to get torn apart for it. I'm going to tackle religion, and that's going to be even more fun, and I'm probably going to get called some names. And then I'm going to tackle politics, and that should be even more fun. So the next three parts, race, religion, politics, of this talk, I'm going to take my concept of adaptive group identification, which is in my book coming out October 2nd, and I'm going to tear apart the common narratives about race, religion, and politics, and why it's so important to identify, and so important to be politically active about whatever thing, and protest and all sorts of shit like that. And I'm going to tear them apart, because they need to be torn apart. These concepts are being hijacked by our fear system and vice versa, and they're destroying our relationships. Like Derek's comment earlier, families are fighting about politics and it's tearing families apart. Families don't speak to each other nowadays, which is stupid. We are not speaking because of politics or religion or race. All of that is completely fucking stupid. So I'm going to apply my concept to each of those three things: race, religion, politics. And we're going to have an interesting chat about how much we should identify based upon our race, religion, and our political status, based upon the context. It's going to be super fun. So I hope this chat was somewhat helpful. A lot of it was kind of the reasons why I want this concept to be true. A lot of this was kind of ranting in some way, shape, or form. I hope it just generally makes sense. The concept generally makes sense that there's an adaptive way of identifying with whatever group that you're a part of. So there are natural labels that we should kind of think exist, like our skin color is our skin color. It's there. You can't not see it. Whereas there are more artificial labels, things like, political preference or religious preference. These are choices, right? Your skin color is not a choice. Your personality is not a choice. Your family is not a choice. However, other tribes are choices: politics, religion, etc. So I want to take those concepts, I'm going to rip race, religion, and politics apart using my concept of adaptive group identification and see just how strongly we identify with them, and if how strongly we identify them is actually producing more suffering or less suffering, and if it's making it easier or more difficult to live our life and accomplish what we want to accomplish. So I hope all this is clear. I cannot wait for you all to read the book when it comes out on October 2nd. Thank you again to Mascot Books. And I look forward to, more chats with you. I'll see you next week. Have a good week.